Donald Trump has been called a lot of things by a lot of people across a very long and very loud public life. But when Arnold Schwarzenegger, a man who is literally one of the most famous Republicans in modern American history, a man who governed the largest state in the country, a man who arrived in this country as an immigrant with nothing and built an empire through discipline, hard work, and an almost inhuman refusal to quit, when that man looks directly into a camera and says, "You stood there like a little wet noodle, like a fanboy," and then Jimmy Kimmel plays that clip on live national television and quietly adds that he doesn't even believe Trump knows what he looks like, something has broken in the Republican Party that they are never getting back. Let's start with what makes the Schwarzenegger-Trump dynamic so uniquely and specifically devastating, because this isn't some Hollywood liberal calling Trump names from a comfortable distance. This is not a Democratic politician working from a script. This is not a cable news pundit with an agenda and a green room. Arnold Schwarzenegger is a former Republican governor of California, a man who became an American citizen in 1983 and voted Republican for over 40 years, a man who personally knew Trump, worked alongside Trump, and was literally offered the chance to endorse Trump's 2016 presidential campaign and considered it seriously before saying no. Schwarzenegger said he was friendly with Trump before 2016. When Trump asked him to endorse the campaign, Arnold thought about it. He ultimately told Trump he couldn't because of Trump's position on climate change. "The bottom line is that he just never believed in it," Schwarzenegger said. "And to me, I said to myself, okay, then I cannot really go and be on his team." He turned down the endorsement, a lifelong Republican. A man whose entire brand was built on physical dominance, iron discipline, and the vocabulary of toughness, turned down the endorsement of a fellow Republican because of science and because of where he believed that particular road was heading. And what followed over the next decade was one of the most methodical, patient, and ultimately devastating public dismantlings of a sitting president by a former ally that American political history has ever produced. Trump, for his part, went on to call climate change the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world at the United Nations General Assembly. Schwarzenegger went on to spend the next decade of his life systematically, publicly, and with the calm precision of someone who has nothing left to prove, documenting everything that was wrong with this president. When two men who once worked together end up on completely opposite sides of history, one of them has changed, and it wasn't Arnold. The feud went public in 2017 with the Apprentice situation. When Trump left the show to run for president, Schwarzenegger took over as host of the celebrity Apprentice. Trump, now sitting in the actual White House with the actual nuclear codes, could not help himself. He spent his first year in the most powerful office on earth, publicly attacking a television show's ratings and mocking the man who replaced him on it. Schwarzenegger responded with a single line that traveled everywhere. "Hey Donald, I have a great idea. Why don't we switch jobs? You take over TV because you're such an expert in ratings, and I take over your job, and then people can finally sleep comfortably again." That line worked because it was exactly the kind of precision clapback that Trump genuinely cannot process. He does not know how to respond to calm, dry humor from someone who has absolutely nothing to lose and no position that requires protecting. Schwarzenegger eventually quit the show entirely, citing the Trump baggage attached to it as the reason he could no longer be involved. Trump's response was to pray for Arnold's ratings in a public statement, which confirmed everything the joke had already said about the gap between the office and the man occupying it. Then came Helsinki in 2018. This is where the wet noodle was born, and where Schwarzenegger permanently and irrevocably staked out his territory as one of the most effective and credible Trump critics in American public life. Trump met with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Helsinki, Finland, and gave a joint press conference where he chose to side with Putin over his own intelligence community on the documented question of Russian interference in American elections. The entire world watched. Career intelligence officials described it as breathtaking. Former CIA directors used words that had never been publicly applied to a sitting American president. And Arnold Schwarzenegger sat down in front of a camera and delivered what remains one of the most precise and personally devastating assessments of a sitting president that anyone in American public life has produced. "President Trump, I just saw your press conference with President Putin, and it was embarrassing. You stood there like a little wet noodle, like a little fanboy. I was asking myself when you were going to ask him for an autograph or a selfie or something like that. You literally sold out with this press conference. Our intelligence community, our justice system, and worst of all, our country. A wet noodle, a fanboy. From a man who built his entire existence on the language and practice of toughness. Calling the President of the United States, to his face, on camera for the record, a fanboy of a foreign dictator who had just interfered in an American election, and then keeping going. saying he sold out the country. Those 4 words, once they are attached to that voice and that face and that 40-year documented history of Republican loyalty, cannot be walked back. They cannot be spun. They sit in the record permanently. Jimmy Kimmel was there for all of it. Night after night, Kimmel has used Schwarzenegger's quotes as material, as ammunition, and as a mirror, because when a decorated Republican former governor of the nation's largest state uses language like that about a sitting Republican president, it cuts through the tribal filter in a way that no Democratic criticism can replicate. It arrives from the wrong direction. There is no pre-built ideological defense against it. The audience that might dismiss a liberal comedian cannot so easily dismiss the man who played the Terminator, won the Mr. Olympia 7 times, ran California, and voted Republican for 4 decades before deciding this was where he drew his line. After Helsinki, Schwarzenegger did not stop. He kept showing up. He kept saying the thing out loud that most Republicans were still finding careful language to avoid. Then came January 6, 2021, and in the immediate aftermath of the Capitol attack, Schwarzenegger made arguably the most important video any public figure produced in those first raw days. He compared the Capitol rioters to the Nazis. He drew on his own childhood growing up in post-war Austria, surrounded by men who had participated in history's greatest atrocity. He said, "I grew up in the ruins of a country that suffered the loss of its democracy. Growing up, I was surrounded by broken men drinking away the guilt over their participation in the most evil regime in history. Not all of them were rabid anti-Semites or Nazis. Many just went along, step by step down the road." That hit differently than anything any American politician managed to say in those days, because Schwarzenegger was not making a rhetorical point. He was sharing a personal history. A family history with a specific shape and specific costs. He shared that his own father came home drunk and screamed and hit the family, carrying physical shrapnel in his body and emotional damage from what he had done and seen during the war. He used his own family's darkest chapter to explain to Americans, in plain and personal terms, what happens when ordinary people follow lies and strongmen over an edge they cannot climb back from. "My father and our neighbors were misled also with lies," he said, "and I know where such lies lead. President Trump is a failed leader. He will go down in history as the worst president ever. The good thing is that he soon will be as irrelevant as an old tweet." That video got tens of millions of views. It moved through political media and then beyond it, into places where political media rarely reaches, because it was not primarily a political statement, it was a personal one. And Donald Trump, who was in his final days as president at that point, could not find a single effective way to respond to it. Kimmel talked about that video. He played clips. He said what viewers were thinking. Here is a man who fled post-war Europe, built the greatest physique in the history of bodybuilding, conquered Hollywood, governed California, and is now explaining the mechanics of fascism to the American public, using his dead father as the evidence and a sword from Conan the Barbarian as the prop. And the current president, watching from the White House, had nothing. Now fast forward to 2024, and Schwarzenegger crossed what was for him the final and most personal line. A lifelong Republican who had never in his entire life officially endorsed a Democrat for president, not in 2016, not in 2020, came out and endorsed Kamala Harris. And the way he did it was as methodical and precise as everything else in this decade-long reckoning. He wrote, "A candidate who won't respect your vote unless it is for him. A candidate who will send his followers to storm the Capitol while he watches with a Diet Coke. A candidate who has shown no ability to work to pass any policy besides a tax cut that helped his donors and other rich people like me, but helped no one else. A candidate who thinks Americans who disagree with him are bigger enemies than China, Russia, or North Korea. That won't solve our problems. Watches with a Diet Coke." That image. From a man who was in the same rooms as Trump, who understood how Trump operated up close, who had received Trump's personal phone call asking for an endorsement. That line did not come from opposition research or a political consultant. It came from someone who had seen the behavior firsthand, watched it play out over years, and had finally decided he was completely done pretending it was something other than what it was. And layered underneath all of this, running as a parallel story throughout the same period, is what was happening inside the actual administration. Because the Lori Chavez de Remmer firing is not a separate story. It is the same story told from inside the building. Donald Trump has fired his labor secretary. Lori Chavez de Remmer is out. The administration's communications director issued a statement saying she will be moving to the private sector and had done a phenomenal job protecting American workers and enacting fair labor practices. What that statement did not mention was that she was reportedly under investigation for pursuing a relationship with a subordinate, for potential travel fraud, for potential drinking on the job, for lavish personal vacations, and that her husband had been barred from entering the Labor Department headquarters after 2 female staffers accused him of sexual assault inside the building, with one alleged incident reportedly captured on security camera, according to New York Times reporting. Her top 2 aides had already resigned based on the investigation. The New York Post, not exactly a left-wing publication, had reported on investigations into her office's booze stash and strip club visits with subordinates. This is the same person who stood in a cabinet meeting and said, "Mr. President, I invite you to see your big beautiful face on a banner in front of the Department of Labor because you are truly the transformational president of the American worker." She made posts on social media about expanding apprenticeship programs and building career pathways 4 hours before the termination announcement. She did not know it was coming. That is the inside of the machine that Schwarzenegger has been describing from the outside for 8 years. That is the dynamic Kimmel has been documenting from his desk every night. You praise loudly. You attach your name and your reputation to the banner. You hang the portrait on the building. You say the thing about the big beautiful face. And then one morning, the call comes or it doesn't come at all, and you find out from the press release, like everyone else. Trump called Arnold Schwarzenegger a failed actor. He mocked the Apprentice ratings. He dismissed him as irrelevant. He prayed for him publicly in a statement he apparently thought was devastating. He tried everything in his standard toolkit against someone who simply could not be made small by those tools, because those tools only work on people who need something from him. Schwarzenegger needed nothing. He had the bodybuilding titles, the movies, the governorship, the citizenship he earned, and the personal history of a family that had already lived through what happens when people go along step by step down the road. He had already seen where that particular road ends, and he was not going along. Kimmel tried to pull Trump's FCC license. Trump posted about Kimmel at midnight. He called for him to be fired across multiple platforms across multiple years. He used a man's assassination as a pretext to try to pull him off the air. Kimmel came back with the highest ratings of his late-night career and said on live national television what he has been saying for years, delivered with the specific calm of someone who understands that the most devastating thing you can do to a man obsessed with being taken seriously is to refuse, consistently and publicly, to take him seriously. 2 voices from completely different worlds, one built in a bodybuilding gym in Austria, one built behind a late-night desk in Los Angeles. Both arriving at the same conclusion, from the same documented evidence, over and over and over again. Neither one is going anywhere, and the man they are both watching still cannot look away from either of them.